Welcome to the Woman Aesthetic Podcast. Join us in seeking deeper meaning and striving to live fully in our womanhood. Hello, everyone. I had the pleasure of speaking with Mrs. Mary Stanford on the relationship between men and women in marriage, as well as her book, The Obedience Paradox: Finding True Freedom in Marriage. This is the question and answer portion of the interview. I hope you enjoy it. For context for the listeners, these questions were submitted by married women, mostly married women. So real life, day-to-day, nitty-gritty kind of questions. And yeah, hopefully this is helpful. So the first one, what do you do when you have something that's absolutely has to get done on time? So like paying bills or taking out the trash, but he constantly delays doing it.
Yes. And again, there's a lot of different situations, a lot of different marriages. But I think what we're dealing with here is if we go back to the dynamic, right? Of, his like reason for being, the thing that is going to affirm him and make him happiest and most fulfilled, right? Is in making you happy, right? In serving you, laying down his life, and you receiving that well and being happy, and then that makes him happy. Great, right? That's the that's the ideal, right? But it's still hard, right? And like the lie that we fall into, being fallen creatures, right, is again like, that's hard, right? I'd rather just sit here and watch TV, right? So number one, it's hard. But number two is, again, the question is why, right? Is he not getting to these things because he is really swamped doing other things that are serving me and the family, right? That's quite possible, right? So number one, sometimes, we ask, we say, I need this. Would it be possible? We don't demand and nag, but it doesn't mean you can't ask, and you can't ask nicely, right? And sometimes you ask nicely multiple times. But if you're hitting a wall, right? Well, again, it could be that he's, overwhelmed. And so sometimes it's like, well, gosh, I might have to take this thing on. Or I might have to say, honey, I can see you're swamped. You've been working so hard and this and that, but yeah, that thing's really leaking. So, I'm just going to call, maybe a plumber, or I'll call a professional, sometimes husbands, that will be a great relief. Could you just call somebody, right? For some, it might be like, oh no, we're not spending money on that, or I can do this. Maybe that'll motivate, right?
Right.
So again, there's no way to, quote, make it happen, right? You can yell and scream all you want. That's just going to make things ugly. And sometimes that's actually going to deter. No woman actually enjoys feeling like a nag, but sometimes we get in that mode. I'd say philosophically, what nagging does is nagging really erases the freedom of his gift, right? Because if he really does relate to you through gift, he's going to be taking some initiative, right? And if it's always do this, do that, there's no freedom in that. That's not the same. And it can be kind of, again, it's not affirming. Nonetheless, families are complicated. There's lots to be done. And sometimes things just get, we have to sometimes sit together and have a talk. And again, but sometimes those things get lost in the shuffle because we have presented him with too many needs at once. And sometimes we ourselves need to say, all right, I might have to wait another, 5 years for that shed to be finished, but we really need to fix the gutter now. And so then we say, honey, could you just do this one thing? And so sometimes it is a matter of there's too much I'm presenting him with. He doesn't necessarily know how to prioritize, or he doesn't get how important this is to me. So I might have to take something else off the plate, and I might have to lower my expectations. So that could be, but just, and also recognizing in the midst of all of that, am I recognizing and appreciating the things that he is already doing? Sometimes that can get lost, and they just feel like I'm an unsatisfied, like there's nothing they can ever do to satisfy me, right? And that's not true, but sometimes that's what gets communicated.
So how do you find a balance and compromise if one spouse is frequently too tired? So that phrase is in quotation, so that's why I'm doing too tired to initiate sex, and the other one has a higher libido and wants to be intimate more often than the other.
Right. And that's, intimacy questions are so funny because sometimes, especially for young women going into marriage, we can never imagine a time when maybe the prospect of being intimate with your spouse wouldn't be 100% appealing, right?
Mhm,
But then,
mhm,
of course, anyone who is married, who has children, you get older, there's changes. Women's desire is definitely more cyclical, right? And one of the huge driving forces behind that is certainly this issue of fatigue, right?
mhm,
At the same time, in addition to fatigue, right, women, and this is something Edith Stein points out, we respond um, in a more integrated fashion to things, right? Like
mhm,
we're going to be happy if we're physically, physical pleasure alone isn't going to make us happy. We want to be emotionally happy. We want to sort of feel the whole, right?
mhm,
We don't just want to be in a desirous mood. That means we also are in a good mood, right?
mhm,
So in addition to being tired, sometimes there's just, if there's a lot on our mind or stresses, that can be an inhibitor to feeling like, being intimate in marriage.
mhm,
But speaking, even very specifically to this issue of fatigue, right? Just not in the mood, right? It's very real. And a good spouse is going to be sensitive to that. Husbands are not wanting to force themselves upon us, right? So we
mhm,
certainly have, you need to respect if your spouse is not feeling up to it, you need to respect that, right? Because you
mhm,
love them, right?
mhm,
However, is that always the case? It's like, are you always too tired, right?
mhm,
They
mhm.
say the definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, if
Right.
you're a mom and you're busy and you're tired and you've got babies and you're stressed, and that's kind of how you are for a while, well, are you ever going to be in the mood? Right. So you kind of,
Right, right.
what's, even when you like mentally say, I just wish I could be in the mood. I'm just physically exhausted and I don't even think that I could respond properly to this. Right.
Mhm,
So my recommendation would be yes, husbands need to respect that, but can't always be this way. So we
mhm,
have to take an honest look. What would it take? What would it take for me to be in the mood, right?
mhm,
Well, maybe we need to plan this a little bit better, right? If I
mhm.
want to be in the mood at 11 o'clock, oh, wait, that needs to start, at 7 o'clock, getting
Right.
dinner. Help me get the kids down. So I can maybe take a little nap or take a shower or go for a run. Like we have to look at it as a
Mhm,
problem that has some steps toward a solution. And guess what? Husbands are great about solutions. Oh, is that what you need? Let's do it, right? So
Yeah,
let's be
yeah.
honest and don't just be the victim. Oh, never in the mood. What could
Mhm,
make this better? And I think
mhm,
it does take effort, right?
mhm.
Women can't just turn it on. We cannot.
Yeah,
And so what does that imply?
yeah.
And again, so I was simply talking about physical things like getting rest, getting a shower, getting a run, feeling physically more energized and
Mhm,
in the mood, right? But it goes for mental too. If you're having a fight about something or if you're upset and stressed about something, well, let's talk about that. Let's get some resolution there, right? Because usually as women, when we're feeling happy emotionally, we're capable of a lot of things, right?
mhm,
We have
mhm,
this ability to sort of stretch and adapt. That's something that I talk about in the book too. But I think that instead of just saying, well, is being too tired an excuse for refusing to be intimate with your spouse? I think it is an excuse. That's legitimate. But what's the point of staying there, right?
Right.
Instead, say, okay, I'm sorry. I'm just not in the mood. A loving husband needs to respect that. They're not
Mhm.
jerks. They're not,
Yeah.
they're not animals either, right?
Mhm,
But that shouldn't always be the case, right? And so what
mhm.
do we do practically to this? What does it take? What would it take? And work on that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
husbands are good at that. So I think to just open it up to we can't just be locked in this because we're going to be locked in this for a while because kids and stress they last many many years, right?
Yeah.
I think trying to seek a, a logical helpful solution makes everybody happy, and then honestly women who are struggling in that area will find being intimate is actually more enjoyable and will
Mhm,
delight in it more, which will delight their husbands more and unite them. It won't just be,
mhm.
okay, I'm making this sacrifice for you, right? Which
Right.
yeah, sacrifice goes both ways.
Mhm,
And and again, I don't know if this is worth saying, but I do say this to young couples, like engaged couples,
mhm,
not usually together, but separately.
mhm,
Um, Men expect to be intimate less often than you imagine in a marriage,
mhm,
and women expect to be intimate a little more often than you expect in a marriage. And I think
mm.
with those expectations on both sides, it can help the challenges that both will face when we reach that
Mm-hmm.
situation.
Does a spouse have a marital obligation to maintain at least a civil relationship with their mother and father-in-law? So, in other words, put differences aside for the sake of the spouse and at least be able to be around in-laws for family gatherings and maintain peace for the sake of their spouse.
Well, number one, I think
Mhm,
this, and part of the last question too,
mhm,
and probably most of the remaining questions.
mhm,
One issue that I think we have to talk about, because there's many people when we get into this topic of headship and submission and marriage, um, we're often looking for very specific applications. And there's
mhm,
a reason why we don't have all of these things listed out, because it comes down to something called prudence, right? We're
mhm,
all called to live that virtue of prudence, right? Prudence
mhm,
is applying something general to something specific, and that's
mhm,
very personal, it's very specific to the circumstances and dispositions of the people in each situation. And so that's why, again, I have my marriage, you have your marriage, right?
mhm,
And it doesn't mean we're talking about relativism here. It's just the very fact of prudence, right? I
mhm,
think in a normal situation, if you have a difficult relationship with in-laws, for example, simply for the love of your spouse, knowing that it's still your spouse's family, right? And
yes.
that it's very hard, when we think about our relationships with our, I guess you call family of origin, right?
Mhm,
The
mhm,
family that I grew up in, family my husband grew up in. Yes, we have our own new family. We love that family, right? But those roots go deep, right?
mhm,
And it doesn't matter what's happened. It's a complex, deep formational relationship. And for good or for ill, you have that attachment to your family. And to
mhm,
honor and respect that, no matter what that person has done, he or she is still your mom or dad, he or she is still, so I think we have to do what we can, and we have to endure what we can to make the best, to try to the best of our ability
mhm,
to see to it that we are relating with those in-laws.
mhm,
Again, we've all heard horror stories. There's probably circumstances where, especially if there's moral issues involved, that maybe that can't be the issue, that can't be the case. Okay.
mhm,
But we have to try for the sake
mhm,
of our spouse to be
mhm,
civil. And even sometimes if it means I can't be around those people, but I respect and support you, buying a ticket to go to this event with your family, supporting, not sabotaging their attempts to even have a relationship with family. Sometimes it
mhm,
may come down to that, where,
mhm,
based on what's been said, or what's, again, there's all sorts of family drama.
mhm,
And
mhm,
sometimes in this day and age, right, it's like I said, it turns to moral if someone's living illicitly with someone, or maybe, an aunt or an uncle now has a trans relationship, or a
mhm,
homosexual, things where you're worried about exposing your kids to things that, okay, that can be legitimate. It's hard, but I do think we have to try to respect that is the family that your spouse came from, and even at the very least, supporting that they have a relationship with them, and not trying to sabotage that, I think, at least
mhm,
as a guideline. But again, it comes down to prudence, because people
mhm,
have different situations, but I would simply say that you do need to make every effort to try.
mhm. What should a married couple's prayer life together look like? And what are practical ways to merge prayer lives and create a domestic church with one's family?
That too, I would say, comes down to prudence. It's going to look different, right? There's so many different personalities, temperaments, levels of spiritual maturity, right,
Mhm,
between spouses, that prayer life together, it's important, but it's going to look very different, right? I
mhm,
know some couples that it's they have spontaneous prayer together. They love it. They do. It's like this magical thing that they have, right? Others,
mhm,
like, maybe occasionally they will say the rosary together.
mhm,
Either way, it's fine. It's good to do something together. What I
mhm,
would emphasize even more, though, is kind of going back to that mutual submission in Christ, is
mhm,
that we have to make sure that we each have our own relationship with God. And
mhm,
that's something that starts off with, again, it's going to have to fit your family like a glove. It's going to depend on the situation of your family, whether mommy maybe gets 20 minutes, every day, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to go, maybe read the gospel of the day, maybe just go have some quiet prayer, maybe pop down if she's near church, make a visit to the Blessed Sacrament. Husbands and wives need to provide this for each other. You can't force each other, right?
mhm,
And you
mhm,
can't say, just because maybe you've been brought up and have been able to nurture some contemplative prayer, a regular prayer life, which is incredibly important, but maybe your spouse didn't or hasn't, right? You
Mhm.
can't force that on them, but what you can say is, I need this for me, honey, and I'll be so grateful if I could, and I will provide it for you. If I go for a walk for 15 minutes, then I'll spot everybody and you can have that, right? And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
we want to make it. So I'd say the first thing is making sure that you are supportive of the other having some alone spirit. And again,
Mhm.
some are going to walk in and take it, some aren't. I know some marriages where, the guy or the girl, one of them, maybe is in the habit of doing an annual retreat or something which
Mhm.
does involve a bigger commitment, whether it be expensive time, money. Those things are very important, right?
Mhm.
And so again, prudence, if you just absolutely see that it's just not possible to leave the fam at this tender time, then maybe don't do it. Or maybe
Mhm.
just try something a little more, an evening of recollection,
Right.
something similar. But don't begrudge it. If for the spouse that's allowing the other spouse this time, it's not revenge time later. It's not like,
Mhm.
okay, oh, it was so awful. And not like there's this price of whining and
Mhm.
complaining, right? Or I came home and I went to my evening of recollection. I came home and not a single dish was done and not a single child was in their pajama. Like
Mhm.
we have to
Mhm.
try to make it possible for the other spouse without resentment, right? Because there's no
Mhm.
place for resentment in a gift dynamic.
Mhm.
Um, but that being said, or something like a holy hour, right? Wow, mom has a weekly holy hour. Dad has one, or maybe we share one, or maybe just, again, it doesn't have to be, you can't force your spouse to do something like that.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if they desire to do it and you see that, like, do what you can to make it happen.
Mhm.
And that in itself, the fostering of the individual spiritual lives, I think will usually overflow into something together. And clearly, when those of us who have young children, to get them into, habits of prayer, it's usually natural that there's going to be some together time praying as a family.
Mhm.
And, I think I would simply just as a mother who's had kids for many, many years, start small. Start
Mhm.
small and consistent. Families with tons of babies, it's hard to do a rosary together. It's really hard. We
Mhm.
started off every Sunday night doing a decade, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Together, but it was enough. And they saw dad praying and they saw mom praying. And little by little, it got easier and easier through the years.
Mhm.
I think the important thing is that the children see that parents prioritize personal prayer and that they
Mhm.
see communal prayer modeled, and spouses are going to do it in different ways. I know a couple that said that every night they just very slowly said a memorare together, and they said that memorare in a particular way for the vocations of their children. And it
Oh.
sounds so simple,
Mhm.
but it
Mhm.
was, if they did nothing else together, they
Mhm.
did that and they had that moment every day.
Mhm.
And that can be enough as long as you are making the attempt to nurture and to support without resentment
Mhm.
um, the the efforts that each individual spouse makes. And again,
Mhm.
it's important for the kids to even hear, oh, mom's going on her rosary walk, or oh, don't disturb mom for a couple minutes, or dad's
Mhm.
going to his holy hour. Those are the kind of things where they absorb and then they see that.
Mhm. Well, the next question I think kind of goes hand in hand with that answer. Um, let's see. How would you advise a wife to let her husband lead when she is more spiritually mature than he is? And how would you encourage him to grow in that maturity?
Yeah, that's definitely connected. Again, it's important that they see something, right? So whatever, maybe dad didn't grow up saying the rosary, but you're trying to do it as a family or trying to do a decade, just have dad lead. Little things that dad is involved in, the kids notice, they notice their dad. But
Hmm.
we laugh in our family because my husband is um so kind and so gentle. But the kids, everything a dad says or does just has this tremendous impact. So our joke is all my husband has to do is sigh. He will sort of do a, and my kids say, "Oh, dad's in a bad mood." They immediately are. They're so sensitive to that, right? Dads
Hmm.
don't have to do much to get
Hmm.
noticed, right?
Hmm.
So we laugh. I mean, I'm sure it frustrates him greatly to have everyone think he's in a bad mood just because he sighs, but what I took from that is that they're very sensitive to his notice. They're very sensitive to his reactions and his responses. And so, okay, so maybe a husband hasn't had the same background, right, in the spiritual life, and maybe he's not confident to sort of spontaneously pray. He can lead a decade and let
Mhm.
him know how important it is. Hey, you lead, right? If he doesn't know
Mhm.
how to do it, there's a million rosary books, right?
Mhm.
I read a study. This is crazy. I was a math person growing up, and I was excited. I homeschooled my kids like pretty much like K through 8. I love doing math with them.
Mhm.
Honestly, most of my kids don't love math, and that was always really sad for me. But I read a study that one thing that made one consistent factor in kids that majored in math and things like that
Mhm.
in college was that they did some math homework with their dads.
Mm.
And I was laughing because I thought, yeah, but some dads aren't math guys. Like in our case, it was like, oh, I'll help you with your math homework. I really love math. My husband didn't love it the way I did at all.
Mhm.
But it was simply, it didn't even matter. It said it didn't matter if they were just doing kind of easy, basic, easy stuff. Just daddy helping in those early years with math and taking an interest in math, daddy thinking it's cool, like inspired a lot of kids to kind of go in that direction.
Oh,
And so I had
interesting.
to laugh, like I was banging my head against the wall. I'm like,
Mhm.
ah, all these years I've been so excited to do math with my kids, and apparently it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Side point being, even the smallest amount of seeing your dad, right? Or like I said, my husband has a holy hour. Dad's at his holy hour, right?
Mhm.
Or dad's leading this mystery. Or dad starts grace. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be huge because each family is individual and different and is going to have their different gifts and their different things that they enrich the family with. So there's no need
Mhm.
to fit into a cutter mold.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
fine. If the wife is more spiritual, mature, the husband's going to be inspired by that. He's going to grow because of that. But
Mhm.
it is important as a witness for the kids to see because his witness is very powerful to them.
Right.
So I just say just find small ways, but don't overthink it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so how does a woman support her husband to lead when she is naturally someone who tends to be more proactive and initiating?
Yeah. One thing, and I've gotten that question a lot. And on a positive note, if you're the type of person, the type of girl who's just sort of a leader, go-getter, very maybe choleric, whatever your temperament is, it's just who you are, right? You're kind of a force of nature, and everybody knows that's kind of it's your gift. Maybe it's a little bit your curse, but it's your gift, right?
Mhm.
Well, number one, chances are that's who you were, and that's who your husband fell in love with, right? He knows who you are. Okay. So there's no need again to suddenly fall into this cookie cutter mold of, oh, I have to look like this, right? He
Mhm.
fell in love with you. This is part of your personality, right? But as we talked about earlier, sometimes along with that personality, sometimes our own, as women, sometimes our own competence gets in the way. I know how I like things done. I know how to do things really well. This is our system. Boom, boom, boom. He loads the dishwasher run. Forget it. He's not doing it. He folds the laundry run. He's not doing it. He can't watch the kid. Like suddenly we are in this position of he steps back. Okay, oh, I won't do that. I'll just go do this thing. I'll stay in my lane. I'll stay in my lane. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. There's some lanes that are just going to naturally develop, but if you do that too much, right? He
Mhm.
gets in this habit of kind of not stepping in. And believe me, there will be moments when you need him to step in,
Mhm.
but he's not going to be in that habit. So I think one way is to look at what you do, look at all that you take on, because sometimes when a woman is super capable and competent, at the same time that she's happy in that role, she's also not happy in that role because she's feeling a bit burdened and put upon, right?
That's why we have this
Exhausted,
question, I think.
right? So then
Yeah.
resentment can develop, right? But guess what? He's feeling resentful too because, well, you don't trust me. Nothing I do is good enough. Think of it this way. All human beings, but in a very particular, unique way, a man must feel that he has something to offer.
Mhm.
That is the nature of being a gift giver. He has to feel that he has something to offer. When we can succeed in making them feel that they have nothing to offer if we get ourselves sometimes into these situations. So my recommendation has always been, he knows who you are. Okay, find a few areas. Find one area where you refuse to relinquish control because you don't trust him to do it, and
Mm.
trust him
Mhm.
and let
Mhm.
the chips fall. And guess what? If he fails and he flops, don't rub it in his face. If he fails and he flops, he's going to know it and he's going to want to fix it and make it better.
Mm.
but not if we come down too hard, right? That's one of the elements of receptivity. If he fails and we say, I told you so, right? Men don't deal with failure so well. It's debilitating. Oh, never mind. I give up, right? If we can be supportive and loving when we've entrusted them with something, then they know they're not alone. When you're not alone in your failure, you got the strength to get back up. And he's going to want to, maybe, okay, so maybe he'll listen to you a little better next time, or maybe he'll recognize your point of view if you dismissed it or something. But try to take stock, look at all the things you're handling and doing.
Hmm.
Tell him, I'm drowning here. I need you to take over this. I trust you to do it. Here's what I recommend, but do what you will. I love you. And even in small matters, that can build up trust, and it's going to make him want to step up more
Hmm.
because he sees that you trusted him. And if he's consistently not doing things the right way, hopefully a little bit of failure will, and not too much I told you so on our part, can hopefully help build that up. Because the thing is, if we don't give them opportunities to step up and lead, even in small areas, they're not going to be able to engage when we really need them to. And there's times, right, when our kids are teenagers and oh my goodness, you know, this is where we need a dad. They have this power, but if they've
Hmm.
abdicated it because we haven't let them have it, right,
Right.
it
Yeah.
can backfire on us. And one thing, I was talking to a priest recently, and this is a little bit painful, but he said he was speaking with a woman who was in a very similar situation. And he asked her, he said, um, has he changed much since you've been married? Or has he kind of always been this way? And she admitted, in her case, the husband, no, he's always kind of been this way. He said, is that basically why you married him? Because you could control him and you liked that? And she said, yeah. So
Wow.
sometimes, right? Sometimes we have to look and see, well, wait a minute. He's not changed. He's the same person I married, but I've changed, right? Because I've
Hmm.
become a mother and a wife, and our life has gone, and I realize, oh, golly, I need him to step up, right? I need
Hmm.
him. He has something that I can't do. I can talk till I'm blue in the face, but sometimes there's things that only a dad's notice and attention can get when it comes to our kids or whatever. And so recognizing, oh, actually, maybe I'm complaining about him, but maybe he hasn't changed. Maybe it's I've changed. So I've got to do something.
Hmm.
I've got to do something. I have to change something and do something scary to kind of open that up and see if he can step into this role. And usually they can because they do
Hmm.
respond to us entrusting them, right? If I say, I
Hmm.
believe that
Hmm.
you can do this, well, they believe in themselves.
Hmm.
So again, once again, it's a testament to the power of our words, right? Our words of criticism and sarcasm, they hurt them in a way that I don't think we can quite imagine. Because when we
Hmm.
criticize what they do, they identify with what they do. So it doesn't mean that what they do is always perfect, but they are sensitive in a way that we might not realize to our criticism. So we just have to be careful how we
Hmm.
express ourselves.
Mm. That is such a good point. Um, let's see, what is the next one? Okay. What is the ideal amount of involvement that each has in the home and with the kids versus outside of the home? So, in other words, in an ideal world, does the man mostly focus on work and projects and the woman stays home raising the kids, or is it ideal to have a 50-50 balance?
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
this one again, it comes down to prudence, it comes down to circumstances. What
Hmm.
I will say is this though, you mentioned in an ideal world. Well, for century upon century, right? The work of the home involved mom and dad, right? Dad's projects, so to speak, for most of the population were at home, right? So
Hmm.
if dad is building something or fixing something or, you know, harvesting something, right?
Right.
He's there. He's there. And so the kids are influenced by that, right? The young men are working side by side with their dad. They're in the work pulls them into relationship and
Hmm.
formation, right? And you're formed by your dad for better or for ill, right?
Right.
Um, and so this idea of like the dad being out there and the mom being in here, right? That it is more modern, right? Industrialization, having the place of work be so far from the home, it puts us in the situation of, huh, how much time is good or who needs to be humble?
Hmm.
Certainly it's natural. It's natural and important, right? A mother is so intuitive to her children's unspoken needs, right? That's really what kind of is meant by intuition, is an awareness of a need that isn't articulated. Well, why do
Mhm.
women have this? Because babies can't tell you what they need, right? And moms
Mhm.
do have to do a lot of guesswork,
Mhm.
but we get better at it. We do tend to have these gifts that men usually have to work a little harder to figure out.
Mhm.
Point being, those bonds that children form with their mother are key. You know, when that's ripped away, it can be very damaging, right? So
Mhm.
so yes, couples and families need to try to keep that in mind. When we talk about the feminine genius, right? The gifts of intuition, empathy, adaptability. You know, John Paul would say the world needs the feminine genius, the workplace needs it. The feminine genius is needed everywhere. To remember that the person is the focus, the person is the reason we're doing all this work. Men, because of their focus on work, can sometimes block out the reason why they're even doing something, right? Because they're focusing on
Mhm.
the thing. So women, with their focus on the person, bring this beautiful and necessary perspective to the world. But just because the world needs the feminine genius doesn't mean the home no longer needs it. As a matter of fact, those
Mhm.
gifts were given for the home. It's just that
Mhm.
they can go beyond the home, right? And
Mhm.
as Edith Stein points out, every woman, whether she has a child or not, whether she gets married or not, has this potential and these capacities that can be brought into any dimension of life.
Mhm.
So that being said, yeah, the home needs moms too. And I think that's
Mhm.
something our current culture, is still in denial about. We think that a
Yeah.
mom's work is just something that's outsourceable, replaceable. It's not about a mom's work. It's about the relationship she's forming through that day in and day out of diaper
Mhm.
changing and making meals and care and talking and listening, and all of those things that basically sometimes you can set it up as doing versus being. We see an emphasis on
Mhm.
doing, and we see that men kind of go along those lines. But for women, it's that being, it's that personal presence that's so important that we simply undervalue because we can't commodify it, right?
Right. Yeah.
But that being said, it's important, right? But it's also important, right? If a guy, he's got to put bread on the table, right? So say he's traveling, commuting far away, he may have to do that.
Mhm.
But if we see that his family is really suffering because they never see their dad, well, he might have to make some tough choices, right? They might have to accept less for him to prioritize being closer, being around.
Mhm. Mhm.
And again, and I do spend a chapter of the book talking about modern situations. A lot of
Mhm.
women have to seek part-time work. Some women are doing full-time work. That
Yeah.
is a matter of prudence. It does fall under, I would say, a dad's authority. It has to be good for the family.
Mhm.
That's something that has to be assessed carefully and sacrificially. But nonetheless, it's not that one's presence is more important than the other. I think
Mhm.
a very close presence to mothers has always been very natural and recognized, in those
Mhm.
early
Mhm.
years. But nonetheless, we have to recognize that what we have now isn't exactly normal either. Um, if your dad does a job you don't understand and he does it far away and you never see him working, you just see him coming home late, how are you going to be and sort of affected by that dad? It's important for a dad to do some sort of project with his kids. So even if it's not the actual work of the home,
Mhm.
build something together, learn something together,
Mhm.
go fishing, go hiking, get a hobby together. It's a
Mhm.
sacrifice. It takes time. It's
Mhm.
important for dads, even if it's not just sitting there. Dads don't like to sit around and stare, right?
Yeah.
Do something with your dad, right? And
Yes.
do it. So some of that mom stuff does come more naturally. We can just sit and talk and be, right?
Yeah.
Men, not so much. They usually, even if they're being together watching a game, right? Or
Right.
watching a fire, or like,
Yeah.
or again, they're doing something together. That's okay. There's still an effect that comes from doing it together. You're modeling behavior, your personality is coming out, your values are coming out through your conversations as you do this thing. Your work ethic comes out. And that's super powerful. So I'd
Mhm.
say if anything, what we have to focus on is making sure that kids get that exposure to their dad,
Mhm.
even if it means having to intentionally kind of do something extra.
Mhm.
But also for moms to recognize that though it's unnoticed and unappreciated and unglamorous, that being present in the home, there's that old age-old
Mhm.
question, what did you do all day? If you are a
Right.
mom who's at
I
home,
don't know any mom who hasn't had that question
I
by a
mean,
stranger, by anybody, where
it's
it's like, what do you
so
even do?
yours,
It's like,
and you're like,
goodness.
it's like it's this silent thing where we don't say, actually, I kept these children alive all day. And but
Mm-hmm.
my presence to them, yes, I did feed them and clean them and, you know, pick up
Mm-hmm.
after them and discipline them and correct them and read to them. Like all of the, okay, I could give you a list of things I did.
Right.
But those doings, while technically they could be done by another person,
Mm-hmm.
I, in fact, am irreplaceable in that role because it was those doings that brought me into a relationship with them and presence to them, an affirmative presence. Kids need to be noticed. And this is one thing that's actually being undermined, not just in homes where maybe there isn't enough presence of the mom, but through our phones and through technology.
Mm-hmm.
Even looking and noticing our kids. Remember that the child who says, "Look, Mom, look at me. I'm diving off the diving board," or look at my trick. Look what I did. Well, when they have to say that 10 times to us because we're on a
Mm-hmm.
phone, that's undermining the feminine genius. We're supposed to notice children, their entire sense of self is based on how we notice them and are present to them. And so
Mm-hmm.
someone will be present, but the person who's noticed they really crave is ours, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
so even recognizing, okay, I'm trying to make an effort to be present to my kids, to be with them as much as I can. If I'm allowing things like technology to undermine my presence to them, that's actually, I think, a greater threat right now to some families than simply mom not being there. And again, it's prudence. There's some families where the mom
Mm-hmm.
has to work. There's some, it depends on the situation of the family. I do try to address it in one of the chapters of my book, but nonetheless, recognizing that for that in that if you want to make that division between sort of doing and being,
Mm-hmm.
guys got to do stuff together. You got to do stuff with dad.
Mm-hmm.
With mom, that might be not so necessary. You have to be together, but we have to recognize the importance of that being and that noticing, looking in the eye,
Mm-hmm.
listening, receiving, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're just
Mm-hmm.
receiving. I can't do anything. I'm watching you. I'm noticing you. I'm paying attention to you. And it sometimes feels like, "Ugh, I could be getting other things done, right?"
Mm-hmm.
But that's valuable. We have to recognize the value of our presence.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right, the next question is kind of long, so just bear with me. I'm gonna read it all out. Okay, so in a situation where the wife or the mom feels like she needs more help at home or just more attention from her husband, what is the best way to get him to step up? So, for example, say they have a baby and the husband is still going out with the guys and staying up late, and she's stuck at home with the baby, and he doesn't realize that he needs to change his lifestyle because of their season of life.
Yes. And again, a huge part of all of this is the age-old thing that we hear about in marriage prep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Communication. Communication is
Mm-hmm.
so huge. Men are not mind readers, right? And we need to find ways to communicate our needs. They will be fulfilled when they make us happy. So if they do
Mm-hmm.
things and see that we're not happy, well, they're not happy either, but they
Mm-hmm.
need to know, how can I make you happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, we do have to think about it from their perspective as well. For some men, it can be a real shot in the arm, right? To have guy time if they've got some guy peers that they enjoy being with, hanging out. Um, we have to see what we can do to not squash that, right? We don't want to be the reputation, have the reputation of I'm just like this bloodsucker, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
demand all this from you. Again, it needs
Mm-hmm.
to be free. But for some men, having that guy's night fills the sails, right? But so for some girls, women, wives, right? Girls,
Mm-hmm.
um, they might support that, but then be all full of resentment and emotion and pouting, afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So, in
Mm-hmm.
other words, are we really giving them that free gift of
Mm-hmm.
do this because it's good for you and I love you, right? So, number one, are we actually supporting the efforts that they have, or are we making them more miserable by making them pay the price when they come home so that all they
Mm-hmm.
really want to do is go away from us, right?
Gotcha.
Do
Mm-hmm.
we want to create an environment where they want to be with us and be home? But if being with me is always me complaining, not smiling, being down, right? So we have to recognize the environment that we're creating.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, kind of like the intimacy question, if I'm feeling overrun, not enough help, getting down, right? Which can happen, right? It's tough
Yeah.
work. again, not a lot of affirmation, not a lot of even results, right? Because raising children takes so long. And you're like, what did I do today? We have
Yeah.
that. So we have to think practically, hmm, what could he do for me that would make me happy? Maybe
Mhm.
I need to get out. Maybe
Mhm.
it would be fun for me to do something with my girlfriends. Maybe I just need a date night with him. Maybe
Mhm.
we need a babysitter. Maybe we need, maybe I just would love, I'd feel so happy if, just one time we could even hire someone to come and do some cleaning for me, like
Mhm.
really take stock and think of what would make me happy and joyful and excited
Mhm.
for you to also have your guy night.
Mhm.
Because we're
Mhm.
not trying to promote resentment. We're trying to promote mutual health, right? But at the same time, I've got to tell him what's going to make the difference. And so I think that can help to take stock and make sure that we're not treating his fun things with resentment. It is possible at times that it is too much, and we have
Mhm.
to try to express it in a way that is honest, maybe gentle. Maybe I just feel like this. Somebody once asked me, it was pretty recently actually, they were asking about a wife's tears and
Mm.
saying sort of like, for some husbands, tears are kind of like kryptonite, right? It's like, oh,
Mhm.
she's crying. Oh, never mind. I will do anything and say anything just to stop
Mhm.
her from crying, right? And I mean, everyone's different. People have different
Mhm.
emotional levels. Some people cry more easily, some people don't.
Mhm.
We have to think about that. How, is he not responding to my tears and pleas because I tear and plead all the time? Is that my go-to? So he doesn't really know how to distinguish between what
Mhm.
will really help and what is just, oh, she's crying again, and so tears are powerful and they're meant to be, and they do have an effect on men. They should have an effect on men, right? So
Mhm. Mhm.
again, maybe it can help if we think, scale back a little. What do I really want? What is one thing that could really help me right now? Whether it's giving me an emotional boost by having some time of my own or some time with him, right?
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
maybe it's just genuinely, I simply need more help and you're going out too much. I don't want to take this away from you. Could you please just have your Wednesday guy night and not your Wednesday and Saturday guy,
Right,
something
right.
like that. So
Yeah.
we have to acknowledge and want to give and try to be really positive about it, but try to be
Mhm.
realistic and clear about what could really help me. And
Mhm.
maybe even give them a few options. Maybe this, that, could you pick one?
Mhm.
And perhaps just that could help. But I think sometimes these questions do get asked when we're already at a dynamic of, I'm already miserable. I'm already upset all the time. He's awful. There's nothing good about him anymore. You know what I mean? Like we start
Right.
to
Yeah.
identify them with this fault. Maybe he is not recognizing. Maybe he's not taking full responsibility. He's not stepping up. We need to let him know we need him. But
Mhm.
letting him know we need him in a way that's going to hopefully let us be really grateful. And then we have to show that we're grateful. Like,
Right.
that was awesome. I loved it. I had a great night out with the girls, or thank you for giving me that break. Just show we're happy,
Mhm.
even if it wasn't perfect, right? We got to
Right.
show we're happy though, because then it's going to encourage him to, oh, that made her happy. I got to try, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
even if he tries to give you this thing and then it's like, oh, he let me go out for a couple hours and I came back and oh, the kids weren't,
Yeah.
you know, okay, we can work on that, but try to at least greet it baseline with thank you, I'm happy. Because if he's going to see that you're smiling more, he's going to see that you seem happier, that's going to hopefully encourage him to keep trying to make you happy in that.
Right. Right. All right, so we have three more questions left. Oh, this one's a good one. What is the best way to handle conflict and disagreement in marriage? So if there's a big disagreement, is it better to give way to your spouse and hope that they come around, or is it better to stand your ground until you come to a compromise? So for example, he wants to move to a different state, but you think it's a terrible idea.
Yeah. So in a way, I'm sorry that we didn't do this question in the first section because to me
Mhm.
is the this is the area of headship and submission that tends to cause the most panic on behalf of women. Like,
Mhm.
does my submission to him include me accepting like his
Right.
decision on big matters?
Mhm.
Um, I'm gonna say yes, but hang on, right? Um, here's the deal. I mentioned communication, right? The way
Mhm.
in which we
Mhm.
communicate. Oh my goodness, we have to work on communication, right? And women
Mhm.
have these gifts. We have gifts of intuition. We have gifts of of seeing a lot of the circumstances around a situation where a man might say, all right, this or that seems practical, this seems impractical. And then we say, okay, honey, yep, I see that, but I'm going to give you a little more information, right? And our information, the insights that we have, are going to affect that. He'll say, oh, that seemed practical, but now that you mentioned this, oh, I see that, right? So we have to understand that our input is huge, important, invaluable, right? So yes, I mean, certainly there's areas of life where we just entrust each other. My husband doesn't scrutinize me on what I decide to make for dinner, but if he did say, I really don't like X, or I like, oh, okay, I try to take that into account. So yeah, there's areas of life where we might not ever find ourselves maybe even discussing, but there's going to be these other things that we do and that we both have strong opinions about, especially if it's, again, something that really affects the family, a move, the choice of a new school, a new job. Those are big things. Whether or not to, this sport, that sport for the kids, is it too much overcommitment? Those are things that affect family life. And oh my goodness, I would say big time discuss. Recognize that your input as a wife and mother, your feminine perspective is 100% valuable to him in coming up. Most of the time, we strive for compromise. And so that's what you should be aiming for, right? Don't sell yourself short. And again, if it's something that you're really passionate about, sometimes tears are going to enter in, right? If it's important enough.
Right.
Don't,
Yeah.
don't abuse those tears, right?
Yeah.
He'll see, oh, I didn't think this affected you so deeply. Ooh, maybe we need to rethink. Okay, so however, you still might be at an impasse, right? You might have said everything, presented everything, talked about it a few times, let emotions die down, talk about it again. You try to communicate in a healthy way, not in a combative way. Sometimes going on a walk and talking about things is better than going eye to eye, they actually say, because when you look a husband in the eye, a man is trained to sort of get in a defensive posture. So sometimes men get in a defensive posture without them even realizing it, because we're looking at things that we're just trying to discuss things, but they think like attacking. So they say sometimes, sitting on a porch swing, going for a walk, talking about these things. Okay. So you reach a point, we've said everything there is to say. Okay. But we still need somebody to make a final say. Well, what, it makes sense that somebody should have a final say, but like, why him? Right? Is there a guarantee that he's going to make the right one? No, there are no guarantees, right? I want guarantees. But here, I think, is the beauty and really the crux of why submission in a final say decision, which again, final say decisions should not be coming around every day. If they're coming around every day, something's wrong. It means you're not trusting each other enough to have authority in your various spheres, right? But here's why I think it's important. It's actually a kind of fail-safe. Yes, guys do have certain gifts for abstracting from emotion and pursuing a long-range goal. So sometimes our emotions get in the way. For us, we say, okay, guys can often have that gift. Okay, great. It's not a guarantee that the decision is going to be a success. Okay. But it's actually our gift. Our gift of we so are person oriented. We tend to be, again, directly relationship oriented. We love him. And this gives us a capacity for, I've used the term, Edith Stein uses the term adaptability. We have this ability to sort of get on board with something that maybe we weren't interested in, maybe we didn't think we liked, maybe we just never thought about before. Women have this ability, she says, to interest ourselves empathetically in something that we might not have cared about were it not for a personal relationship that drew us in. I like to say we can get on board with stuff for the sake of a relationship, because women tend to prioritize the relationship over any particular actions, right? It's like, well, I love you. And so, okay, and I use the example in my book, like my mom, my dad was an engineering student. He liked classic cars. She learned everything she could about classic cars. I learned about football so I could hang around with my husband on Sunday afternoons because he would like to watch football. We do this with our kids all the time. Like I know my one friend who imagined she had all sisters. She had all these cool ideas for being a girl mom, and she had all boys, right? And so she got herself interested in Legos, military, anything. And because she did it to foster these relationships, it just comes naturally. So number one, we do have a special ability to get on board with a decision that we might not, I'm not talking about something morally evil. I'm just talking about a decision, right? A prudential decision for the sake of the relationship. It's
Mm-hmm.
not easy, but we have an ability to kind of stretch ourselves. Think about the guy because, well, yes, he's oriented to relationship, but he's oriented to relationships through his actions. A
Mm-hmm.
man identifies with his actions. We've talked about that. That includes his decision. When he makes a decision, he's tying his own identity to that decision. He's kind of putting himself on the line,
Mm-hmm.
which means if the decision fails, he's going to feel really bad, right? If,
Mm-hmm.
if the thing he picked fails, he's feeling that to his core. And it can actually be quite debilitating for him if he's alone in it. If
Mm-hmm.
I am with him in that decision because I love him and I can more clearly distinguish him and my love for him
Mm-hmm.
from my opinion of his decision, right? Because women are the
Mm-hmm.
ones that make more of a distinction between who you are and what you do. For
Mm-hmm.
men, it's they don't make that distinction so much.
Mm-hmm.
So what it actually means is if I cling to him and say, all right, honey, I'm on board with it, let's do it because I love you, right? We're going to give it the
Right.
best go. I try to make the best of it. Number one, if it works out, great.
Right.
I trusted him, right? If it doesn't work out, he's not alone in it. He can recover from it. And because I clung to him in it and didn't say, I told you so, right? Which I should, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's going to try even harder to make it up to me, even if it means listening to me a little better next time, if he discounted some
Mm-hmm.
of my opinions.
Mm-hmm.
So, if anything, I would feel that this ability of ours to prioritize relationship over activity, it gives us an ability to cling to them, to get on board in a way that allows us to support them when things go sideways and in a way that will then encourage them to keep trying, to keep
Mm-hmm.
trying. Because if we're calling all the shots and then it fails,
Mm-hmm.
he's not going to want to take responsibility for that. It's going to it's going to make him want to walk away. You didn't trust me and now we're in this position. So there's,
Mm-hmm.
the potential for resentment is even bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it says I trusted you. I trusted you. And yeah, it's you can't predict how things are going to go, right? The best
Mm-hmm.
laid plans, this job, that move, this. Guess what? Things fail and we learn. But guess what? We're still left with our marriage and with one another. And if I say, well, I trusted you in it, he's going to remember that I trusted him in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Mm-hmm.
try to do better next time. So it's actually a kind of superpower that we have that helps us get through these times. Stormy times, tough times, difficult decisions are going to come in every marriage. They're going to come.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's no magic formula where he's always going to make the right decision. As a matter of fact, my husband once told me sometimes it's hard to always have to be the one to make all the decisions. So that actually made me realize you don't have to give everything to him. You take on responsibility for things. But when it comes to something that affects the whole family, like he doesn't want to decide what's for dinner every night. He doesn't want to decide every out. You can't put that on him every time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dad
Mm-hmm.
must approve of every outfit you wear, or dad must, or wait till your father gets home. There's a place for that. But if you do
Mm-hmm.
that all the time,
Mm-hmm.
he's always the bad guy. He's always the one that right. I'm in some sense abdicating a little bit of my responsibility. There's this
Right.
rule of subsidiarity. We all have our areas of expertise and we have to respect that and listen to it. So
Mm-hmm.
listening to each other, learning from our past mistakes, recognizing that I love this person and I trust this person and how important my trust is. If it's a really big deal, yeah, you do, you can drag it out. You can
Yeah.
really, please no, things.
You could really discern it, like as a you should, you know?
And I, sometimes like, could we wait a year before we make this decision?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So communication and really talking it through and presenting your opposing views, there isn't necessarily a time limit. Sometimes there is a time limit, right? Sometimes there's a
Mm-hmm.
decision. We got to make this decision, right? And then, okay, we've talked it out. I've said my piece. Honey, I'm going to cling to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if it flops, I love you and I can get over it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's ultimately what we're saying. It is going to be easier for individual women. There's some women that are still going to be like, "Arr." But
Yeah.
nonetheless, you clinging to him and trusting him, even when he flopped, is precisely what's going to be the motivator to help fix the situation that we got into
Mm-hmm.
that turned out to be negative. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that to say that a husband has a final say decision is consistent because with this idea of authority as gift, because
Mm-hmm.
in this situation, he is trying to make a decision that's for the good of our family, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not selfish. It's actually selfless. It's supposed to be selfless. It's hard. It's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
pressure, right? it can be seen as a gift to the family that you can receive. However, it may be a painful gift, right? It might be, I
Mm-hmm.
really didn't want to leave our friends, or I really didn't want to do that, right? There is
Yeah.
absolutely no getting around that. It will involve, right? Suffering, pain, frustration, wanting to say, I told you so, or look what we're missing out on, all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But to try to recognize that, yeah, that actually does fit in with the gift dynamic. And as a matter of fact, it's a kind of fail-safe for keeping us
Mm-hmm.
united through hard times. Instead
Mm-hmm.
of saying, well, you didn't trust me. You didn't trust me, or you railroaded me, and now things flopped, and now I don't want to have anything to do with it, right? We see that
Right.
if we don't have that, it can actually be really damaging. But it does not mean, you can't leave the house without your husband's permission. Some of these things that you hear bandied about violate not only the principle of subsidiarity, but I mean, the popes throughout the years have talked about, a husband's authority in the home. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it was Pius the 11th. I mentioned these all in my book, who says, yeah, a wife is bound to obey her husband, but only, he says, in matters, but not only if it is according to right reason and is not against her dignity. I mean, there's plenty
Mm-hmm.
of room there for saying, no, I'm a human person, and
Mm-hmm.
um, there's no reason to suggest that a wife doesn't have the capacity, right? Again, it goes back to obedience is not something that's forced, and it's not something that's required because we're not capable. The Greek word for submission that St. Paul uses when he says, it's often translated as, be submissive, but it's really submit yourself to your husband. It's a free act. It's not
Mm-hmm.
saying, ladies, you're kind of inferior, you need this. It's no,
Right.
for the sake of this relationship, if this one flesh, if this two becoming one is going to happen, it's going to require a free decision on your part to say, yeah, we're going to go with that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something that we do for the sake of unity. It's about
Mm-hmm.
unity, spiritual union, which is such a mysterious concept. There's no spiritual union without giving and receiving, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
hard. It's painful, but I would put it in the category of those fruitful pains,
Right.
from which you can really grow. There's so much growth that can happen when you cling to Him, even when
Yeah.
ultimately you don't agree, but you've done everything you can to communicate your perspective.
Yeah. Wow. That was very insightful. I think a lot of people also
Mhm.
forget,
Mhm.
just that it's hard.
Yeah.
Um, how do you support your spouse through mental health challenges or physical challenges for that matter?
Mm. Again, sometimes when I think about what we're really saying when we're getting married, it's almost like signing your name to a blank check.
Hmm.
Now, I know the younger generation don't write checks as much, but basically, right, you sign your name, anybody can fill in the amount, right? We don't
Uh-huh.
know what this gift and this receiving, what it's going to cost us, right? We
Hmm.
really don't know the cost. And so when you marry somebody, you have a vision of how things are going to go, right? And
Hmm.
even if things end up being more wonderful, right? They're going to be different from how you imagined it, right? Because
Hmm.
again, this is ultimately about that drama between us and God, and things that we need to grow in, and things that we need that we don't even know we need, right?
Hmm.
So disabilities, I mean, for a man in particular, physical or mental disability, any kind of disability is going to cut at him in a particular way, right? Because he's not going to be able to identify with his work because he's not able to do the work, right? Or he's not able to
Hmm.
do it well. And so he's going to be struggling with a sense of diminished identity, and that's going to hurt, right? So not only
Hmm.
is he not providing for you, but he's struggling and he's depressed, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's really hard, right?
Yeah.
And so there's no easy answer to that. But even recognizing what he needs to feel that what he can he needs to feel that he has something to contribute. So whether he's not able to provide right now, like again, even in the chapter on my book of, wives being primary providers, right? Certain situations that might have to happen. You might need to take that over. You
Hmm.
might need, there's seeking help, getting help for guys can be particularly hard.
Hmm.
Um, Even marriage counseling, right? That
Hmm.
marriage counselor said that men are particularly loath to want to go see a marriage counselor because for them it's like admitting failure, right? Oh, I
Hmm.
failed. It's awful, right?
Hmm.
So even getting a husband to see a counselor to get help for something mental or psychological, honestly, getting our husbands to go to the doctor can be really hard. That is a big thing. We had a homily last week where the priest said, husbands, go to the doctor. He got it. Like he knows it, right? Because again, that too is like admitting like, oh, there's something wrong, you know.
Mhm.
So again, certainly I encourage husbands, go to the doctor. If your wife thinks you need counseling together or individual, go get it, do it, right? Do it
Mhm.
to please her if necessary. But guess what? You might get help. So what ends up being tough though in those situations, and again, the whole mental category is very broad, but even let's just say physically, right? It might be that you have to step in, and that's going to be hard because at its core, he still needs to be loved by having what he does affirmed. And you still crave love by being given a gift. And so when you're in a situation which is kind of atypical in the sense of, all right, now you seem like you're taking care of things, right? How do I maintain that dynamic? You don't stop being a woman, right? It doesn't stop being a man. So it's going to take a lot of creativity, a lot of spiritualization of this, clearly.
Mhm.
You can't do it without our faith, but what is it? What is it that he can still contribute? He
Mhm.
reads to our sons, he talks to them, he sits and watches a game and talks about it with this kid while I do dinner, and that's time together where he's attentive to them. You find things that he can do that you can
Mhm.
thank him for, right? And
Mhm.
he finds ways to give to you, whether it's praise and thanks, compliments, whether, if he can do things around the home, he just can't make money right now, whatever.
Mhm.
So he does dinner. So he learns how to make something, so he might have to think outside of the box.
Mhm.
He's got to find ways, even small ways, to make you feel cherished, and you have to try to recognize those ways. So
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
doesn't, even if like sort of some typical roles may be switched or reversed, we have to recognize that spiritually we tend to crave affirmation according to these sort
Mhm.
of gender specific roles. And it means being creative, it means noticing, and it means making a lot of extra effort. But I don't think any of it is going to be possible unless we see it in context to our relationship with God.
Mhm.
And one other thing on that, and why this can help in particular, I was talking with someone recently. Uh, it was the wife of a person who's a brilliant scholar and teacher, and he experienced a health breakdown.
Mhm.
And one of his mentors said to him, "Listen, you teach as long as you can teach. If the health is breaking down, if you can't teach, write.
Mhm.
If it gets to the point you can't write anymore," he said, "your job, your vocation is to suffer."
Wow.
And so we got to dig deep and recognize.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where our faith helps us, right? The redemptive power of suffering. I mean,
Mhm.
manfully embracing that suffering. I mean, women too. As Edith Stein puts it, women are made to suffer. We are used to things happening to us outside of our control. And
Mhm.
we can, in some sense, we can sometimes, our job is to help men to suffer, help them to receive this thing that I can't control.
Mhm.
Not that it's easy, but we're kind of good at it, But
Our flex.
for him, recognizing that when something doesn't seem to be accomplishing anything, right?
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
what debilitates them. Look at men. When she says that women are made to suffer, it might sound a little weird because you're like, okay, but men suffer immensely. They're like capable of
Mhm.
immense physical feats, right? Of suffering,
Right.
deprivation. Look what they do, and sports and wars and hard work, dirty jobs. Have you ever seen that show? The stuff men do, right? You're like, how
Right.
do they do that, right? But men are capable of great physical feats of suffering and exertion when they see that those things are accomplishing something. They're saving a life,
Mhm.
they're winning a gold
Mhm.
medal, they're saving a town, they're providing for a family, right? They're fixing things. But when men are asked to endure something that doesn't seem to have any visible fruit, right?
Mhm.
Then they're
Mhm.
like, why? Then they're like, then they can be it's very hard, right? They're like, I have a cold and I'm complaining. So only, I think, through the lens of faith can we see that our suffering is redemptive, you know,
Mhm.
for the souls of our children, for strength for my wife, for grace, for forgiveness, for whatever it is, right? We know the power of accepted suffering that we didn't choose is tremendously, tremendously, I think of our Lord in the garden, right?
Mhm.
Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. In other words, whoa, this is a cup you're asking me to drink. If possible, let it pass. But not my will, but thy will be done. That and then that moment expresses utter union between father and son, right?
Mhm.
Not my will, but thy will be done. The union of wills, the acceptance of what somebody else wants for me. Clearly, if God is allowing this misfortune, what he's allowing for me, so I'm going to embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we get union with God.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not easy, but I do think we have the recipe for it if we can get that spiritual support during those times.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my last question, um, is after having children, how do you keep for how do you keep from growing apart? How do you communicate with your husband about worries of possible changes in yourself, such as physical changes? And how do I calm these worries?
Yeah, I think that it's amazing how children bond you. It makes sense, of course,
Mm-hmm.
right? They are literally physically, the fruit of your love, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the first time in your life, having something other than yourself that you love more than yourself. And it's
Mm-hmm.
the very same thing that that spouse loves more than himself, right? I mean, you can't think of a greater way to bond, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet, right? And you're never going to stop loving your children. They grow up, right? And it seems like it's going to be so long, and it happens so fast. I'm so grateful I have 7 children because as my kids start to graduate from college, like some of my friends, it's their last one or it's their only one, and
Mm-hmm.
it's huge. It's earth-shattering, right? I'm so glad
Mm-hmm.
I can put that off a little, but it's going to be here. The day is going to be here where we look at each other. We're still married, right? Our marriage was not just about the children. Our children were the fruit of our love, right? But our love is still there, and there are other fruits that are meant to come from it. So we have to recognize that we have to be nurturing that relationship, the the friendship. We have to be nurturing it all the way along. And
Mm-hmm.
there is the old story. Yes, I mean, there were several friends of mine whose parents got divorced when they were in college. They kind of held it together for
Mm-hmm.
the sake of the kids. Well, I mean, certainly that's a good motivator, but it's just as devastating for your child for you to divorce, by the way, when you're,
Right.
when your kid is an adult. But
Yeah.
that being said, aside from looking at the devastation, is hey, I promise to be with you for life. And what was what drew us together at the beginning? We had to love one another, and there was things that we shared and had in common. Well, you've got to nurture and foster those things or find new things. But you need to find things that you do together, not all the time, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
it's actually very important and healthy for spouses to have a hobby or a passion. Now, again, when you're loaded with kids and you're living life to the max, sometimes those things are kind of on the back burner, but so you take it up again, or you
Mm-hmm.
keep maybe you're a musician, or maybe you do crafts, or maybe you write, or you read, or you do some teaching, whatever it is, nurture it because you're going to need something,
Mm-hmm.
but you've got to do something together. Hey, maybe we took up, wine tasting. Maybe we took up hiking. Maybe we read a book together. You've got to work on that, and don't wait. Don't wait until the kids are grown, because let's do a little something along the way, to
Mm-hmm.
remember
Mm-hmm.
that we're not just instruments, right? We love one another as persons, and we foster friendship by sharing common interests. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really important. The other thing that was mentioned was like, yeah, we change over time, right? And especially for women, right? Our body changes, we get old. I mean, age affects guys too, but because of our close identification with our body, sometimes we feel it more, we notice it more, we feel that
Mm-hmm.
pressure that I don't look like I used to. And it
Mm-hmm.
can be very depressing and debilitating. And frankly, it can take its toll on the whole family because everybody's sick of hearing about how mom doesn't like how she looks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what do we do about it, right? Well, again, spiritualize it. We're all going to die. But number two, right? Along the way, again, even if it's small things, mom taking care of her health is important. Mom getting to do some exercise, mom getting to go for a walk, supporting mom when she tries to maybe eat healthier, lose a few pounds, right? It's important for her to feel pretty, go shopping, find something that works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it is important to support, a mom and a wife through that body image, but also one of the things that counters some of our struggles with body image is remembering, like men do, that we're not just our body, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
They identify with their deeds. Sometimes we have to push that a little more.
Mm-hmm.
Do something, get involved. Is things wane a little with your kids? Volunteer at church. Okay, maybe teach
Mm-hmm.
part-time. Oh, do a craft thing. It doesn't matter if it's a hobby or paid work. Do something, do something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then
Mm-hmm.
you are finding self-worth and enjoyment in something that you're doing. It's
Mm-hmm.
not all about how I look. And I can accept that I don't look the way I did 20 years ago, because actually I'm kind of proud that I did this thing and I'm
Right.
excited about this thing and I'm able to share and help with this thing. Women love to feel that we make a difference in the world. So a
Mhm.
small thing that we're doing is incredibly spiritually edifying for us. And that's going to boost our sense of personal identity. It's going to help counter the temptation to think we're just our bodies. Because
Mhm.
guess what? It's going downhill. And I know right now
Mhm.
I need to be positive about my body because it's going to look better now than it's going to look 10 years from now, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you're going to look back and be like, I can't believe I was stressing about those jeans. I looked great that picture. You know how that is when you see a picture of
Yeah.
yourself and you think, oh, I thought I looked good that day. Like, oh, I didn't. I swear, 10 years from now, you will look back at that picture and go, oh my gosh, I looked adorable. I was super fresh. And yeah, so I think the biggest thing is together, you got to find something that you like to do, whether when the kids are grown or maybe a little along the way, so it's there waiting for you. But also, you need to find something individual because that's going to
Mhm.
help with those changes and give you confidence. And guess what? When you're confident and you're feeling good about yourself and you have something you feel pretty in, it's going to radiate. Confidence is what's going to make you attractive. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter how much you weigh or how many wrinkles you have. When your husband sees you feeling confident, feeling pretty, looking good, you're going to be absolutely as desirable to him as you used to be.
Mhm.
But no, there's nothing attractive about a person who's depressed and moping and and just
Mhm.
focusing inward,
Mhm.
holding in upon herself.
Yeah.
That's awful for us and it's awful for them.
Yeah. Well, those are all the questions that I have. And before we wrap it all up, I know you just gave a bunch of advice, and it was super solid, but I ask everybody this. Um, if you could give women one piece of advice, it could be on this topic, it could be on something else, what would it be?
And that's a good one. Just one? I'm just teasing.
Just one.
I
You can give
love
a
to talk.
couple.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, 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 no. Again, I think it would be to really, it sounds boring, right? It sounds boring and it sounds like work. Cultivate that spiritual life because if it's true that women find a deep fulfillment in relationships, right? That we're sort of made for it, we put it above all else. Every relationship in your life at some point or another is going to let you down. And so if I
Mhm.
define myself by that relationship, I'm going to be really hurt.
Mhm.
Edith Stein says, no, 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 no. You don't go against the grain. We are made for relationship. Cultivate that spousal relationship with our Lord because that way we're going to be able to take all of those things that we can't control, right?
Mhm.
In stride. We're going to be able to give them meaning. We're going to be able to almost marvel at what he's going to do with us because that's the nature of being the one that bears fruit, right? I'm not the source of my children, right? I needed
Mhm.
my husband for that, but they did. I was a part of it, right? They came through me, right? We don't know the spiritual fruits that our Lord is going to bring through us. We
Mhm.
don't know. It's in a sense a surprise. So even if it's the tiniest little bits, even if it's 5 minutes at the beginning of the day, right? There's times in our life where all we can do is 5 minutes, but cultivate the spousal relationship with our Lord. Somebody wrote recently, making a date. She said she made a date with our Lord, and she wasn't even talking about going to adoration. She just literally went and had coffee and did some spiritual reading. It was just like, I'm making a
Mhm.
date with my Lord.
Mhm.
Cultivate that. And whether your marriage is filled with, you know, exhausting joys or painful, thorny crosses, because things can go anyway, right?
Mhm.
That fostering that will hopefully give you the presence of mind to see him in each situation and in each person. I just finished reading, there's a book I want to recommend.
Mhm.
Have you heard of Carol Houselander? She was a kind of a mystic British writer in the 1950s, and she wrote this book. She wrote many things, but it's called The Reed of God. And in this book, she talks about this whole idea of receptivity and that we're all called to bring forth, like Mary, our Lord, right? We're all
Mhm.
called to bring forth Christ as a fruit. And so she also challenges us to see Christ in every person. And she says, even in the most hardened sinner, Christ is there. He's there like he's there in the sepulcher. It's like he's there in the tomb, but he's there. So
Mhm.
keeping our spiritual life um, going, right? Keeping it not on life
Mhm.
support, keeping it going is
Right.
going to hopefully help us to have the right perspective. It is
Yeah.
so easy to lose perspective in a difficult marriage. It's easy to lose perspective with our children who we think we own and control, and often we don't realize
Right.
that we don't own and control them until they start making their own decisions and they're adults, and then it becomes this new huge vulnerability of, oh my goodness, I was never in control, right? God shows us, He shows us through our joys and often through our sufferings. He shows us how much He loves us and how much He wants us to just open our arms and receive Him. So, long answer to a short question is just don't give up on cultivating that relationship with our Lord. You will fail a million times over, but don't give up.
Well, Mrs. Stanford, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about this important topic.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy.
And for anyone who is looking to dive in more, this is the book. This is what it looks like. It's called The Obedience Paradox, Finding True Freedom in Marriage. And it goes even deeper than we did in the conversation on marriage, all of the topics under that, including practical situations that happen every single day in marriage. And thank you so much for listening to the Woman Aesthetic podcast. Let's connect on Instagram at the Woman Aesthetic. And if you're loving the podcast, I would be so honored if you'd go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a review. Until next time.